Today, we're going to talk about salt on Dr. Wallace Live. We do this every week at 12:30 Eastern Time on Mondays. Honestly, we get to start at any time between 12:30 and 1 o'clock on Mondays, depending upon patient load, and they come first. So once I'm done with them, I tune in with you guys in Facebook. And today, you're going to love this because I'm going to be able to give you permission to maybe not feel so bad when you're eating salt or sodium, which has been vilified for a long time. I can think back to as long as I can remember where my mom and dad in my house, my dad would always be reaching for the salt shaker and salting his food like crazy. And my mom would get so upset because she'd say, "John, you haven't even tasted your food yet. Why are you salting it already? You know you're not supposed to be having salt." Because for years and years we've been told that sodium is bad, that we need to eat as little sodium as we can eat, and if we do eat a low sodium diet, that we will be healthy for it. So we're going to talk about that today. We're going to talk about what the research says about this. We're going to talk about what you need to have, how much sodium you should have each day, what the limits are, if there are limits. We're going to talk about what happens physiologically in your body when you eat sodium and when you have too much and too little. And we're going to answer all those questions that you might have. While we're going through this, if you do have questions, type them in. Sometimes I can see them on the phone, sometimes I can't. If you're watching the replay, you can still enter in your questions and we get back to you. I answer all those personally. So ask your questions there. I love to see them. If you like this video, please click the like button. If you want to see more of these videos, like the page. And if you like the page or our YouTube channel, then you'll get updates every time we go ahead and do some of these. So let's get started. First of all, what are we told? We're told that we need to have a limit to our sodium. And that limit, according to the American Heart Association, is less than 2,300 milligrams of sodium per day. But they go further in saying, ideally, they say that it should be less than 1,500 milligrams per day. So what does that equate to? What does that really mean in real terms? Because who knows how much 2,300 milligrams is? Well, it's 1 teaspoon. If you have a teaspoonful of sodium, that's 2,300 milligrams. And you have to think about the entire day, all the things you're eating, most of which are going to contain some sodium. So it's a very difficult target to attain. But where did this all get started? Why were we ever told this in the first place? And looking back on this, there was a scientist in Brookhaven National Laboratories, which isn't too far away from where I grew up in Long Island. His name was Louis Dahl, D-A-H-L, and he felt that he had found the answer to hypertension. And he was able to induce hypertension in mice by giving them sodium. So that sounds pretty clear. We give more sodium, these mice have hypertension. But how much sodium did he give them? He gave them 500, the human equivalent of 500 grams of sodium a day. And the average American in the U.S. right now eats 3.4 grams of sodium per day. And he gave them 500 grams, the equivalent of 500 grams. So that was the first thing. And then the second thing that led us down this low salt pathway is the population studies. And they all point to Japan, which has very high salt intake and also has a very high rate of hypertension and what else do they have? Yeah, high blood pressure and more strokes. So they point to that. However, if you really dig deeper, you look at a country like South Korea, which has the highest intake of sodium in the world. You'd think that they'd have more hypertension. But ironically, they have the lowest rates of hypertension. So you can't really use those population studies because they're conflicting, right? So the data that they went off of early on was those two things, Louis Dahl and the population studies. So what happens when you have too much sodium? If you eat too much sodium, essentially let's just say you take a lot, like the 500 grams of sodium that the scientist did. Your body will begin to dump it and excrete that sodium. It'll also shunt your that sodium right to the blood and also to your skin, so you'll sweat it out. But the concern is that it increases blood volume. So too much sodium in the blood will draw fluid from the tissues, and it will cause there to be an increase in blood volume, which will cause hypertension and will also is theorized to cause cardiovascular disease and death if you have too much. So that's what happens when you have too much. But I have three questions. Three questions is, how much is too much? And I'll tell you right now, it's not what the American Heart Association says. The second question is, doesn't our body have a mechanism to deal with this? And the third question is less better? So our bodies do have a mechanism to handle too much salt intake, and if you take too much in, the liver is going to signal the kidneys to reduce that absorption, and it's also going to dump it. It's going to shunt it to the skin, like I just talked about. And there's studies out there that show it's almost an equal amount. So the amount that you take in over your needed amount, your body will urinate out. It can be measured in the urine, and it's very similar to the amount you take in. So your body is very good at this. Your kidneys are very good at getting rid of what they don't need. But what happens if you take in too little sodium? If you really listen and say, hey, I'm going to be really good at this. I'm going to do what the American Heart Association and all my doctors tell me to do. I'm going to eat very, very little sugar, very, very little salt. Well, what happens if you do that? Oh, before I tell you that, one of the other things that happens in our bodies if we take in too much salt is your taste buds for salt actually flip, and they will cause you not to have any desire to have salt at all. In fact, you'll push it away. Okay? If you have too little salt intake, you will crave the salt like crazy. You'll do anything you can do to be able to get salt. And your body will also activate something called the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system, the RAAS. And it kicks that into gear when sodium content gets to be under about, there's differing numbers, but about 2,800 milligrams. And this is what happens when you do that. I'll actually read from one of the studies. It has been known for years that decreasing sodium intake causes the body to respond adaptively, increasing the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system. The activation of this system is recognized as a factor in hypertension. So hear that. So you eat too much salt, and they activate the RAAS system, and it increases, it's a factor in hypertension. So that's one of the things we're trying to get rid of. It also is a factor in kidney disease, heart failure, fibrosis of the heart, and other problems. Sodium restriction also increases serotonin, activity of the sympathetic nervous system, and plasminogen activator inhibitor type 1, which contributes to the accumulation of clots and is associated with breast and prostate cancer. So if you have too little salt, all those things happen. Those are not good things. There's also many symptoms that can happen, one of which is severe fatigue and lethargy, and you're completely exhausted. You want to lay on the couch and you don't want to get up. I've also read studies that it can increase your fat storage in your body. It causes headaches, seizures. So there's a whole host of symptoms that can happen if you have too little sodium. And your body can't do much about this if you have too little. It can't create it out of thin air. You have to have this, it has to be taken in. So let's read some more research, because I love that, because then you don't have to believe me. You can believe what these scientists are all learning. So let's read through some of these. Okay, a meta-analysis of 7 studies involving a total of 6,250 subjects in the American Journal of Hypertension found no strong evidence that cutting salt intake reduces the risk for heart attacks, strokes, or death in people with normal or high blood pressure. So, the Journal of Hypertension tells you that's not going to do much. Here's another one. Intersalt, a large study published in 1988, compared sodium intake with blood pressure in subjects from 52 international research centers and found no relationship between sodium intake and the prevalence of hypertension. In fact, the population that ate the most salt, about 14 grams a day, had a lower median blood pressure than the population that ate the least. So it's the exact opposite that they're telling us. Here's another one. In 2004, the Cochrane collaboration published a review of 11 salt reduction trials. Over the long term, low salt diets compared to normal diets decreased systolic blood pressure, and that's the number on top when you're doing your blood pressure, in healthy people by 1.1 millimeters of mercury, and diastolic blood pressure, which is the number on the bottom, by 0.6 millimeters of mercury. So what that really equates to is if you're taking your blood pressure and someone tells you, oh, you have high blood pressure, you're 140 over 90. Well, if you read that study, it just basically says, well, at best, what's going to happen is you're going to go to 139 over 89, at best. Here's some really crazy study. It's unbelievable. It actually shows the complete opposite. Let's see. I gotta get that one. Well, here's some other things. So studies show that increased sodium intake will improve immunity, will reduce vascular leakiness, will lower inflammation. In one study of, in one study of over 3,000 people over 4 years showed a clear increase in mortality in those who ate less salt. A clear increase in mortality. You know what mortality means in English? Death. So 3,000 people over 4 years showed a clear increase in mortality in those who ate less salt. And then another study with 11,000 people over 22 years showed an inverse relationship between salt and mortality. There's that word again, mortality. So an inverse relationship, what does that mean? That means if you have high salt, you have low mortality. If you have low salt, you have high mortality. These are studies. This is not my opinion. So I could go on with more research because there's a bunch of it. For those of you who have hypothyroidism, there's implications for you with progesterone and estrogen, how that affects it. There's other studies that talk about women who are going through PMS or who are ovulating. They have a desire to eat more sodium. There's a reason for that. And what I'm telling you is you should listen to your body, okay? So there's more studies. I urge you to go investigate it, read it, research it. You'll find that we don't have to be so scared of salt. We have to be conscious of it, and that's where I should finish off. Well, if salt isn't bad for you, but in high amounts it is bad for you, how much should we end up taking? Well, in reading the research, it's pretty clear the recommendations are between 3,000 and 6,000 milligrams a day. There's a sweet spot. So if you have too much sodium, your doctors are right. It is bad for you and you can die. So excess sodium isn't good. But on the other side, too little sodium is bad for you. And what the American Heart Association is recommending, ideally at 1,500 milligrams, what the real research shows is that we should have between 2 to 4 times that each day. 2 to 4 times. So if you're going to eat, which I suggest you do, don't be so worried about salt and sodium. However, with that said, when you are having sodium, you have to be careful. When you're having salt, you have to be careful choosing a salt. If you are someone, again, with hypothyroidism and you're reaching for that iodized salt, I wouldn't do that. I would avoid that. I would avoid the general table salt that you see in the restaurants that is just pure NaCl. You want to have a good quality salt. This is the salt that I recommend. This is called Premier Pink Salt, and this has over 72 different trace minerals in it. And the reason why I recommend this one is because if you've got other sea salt, which would be better than your general table salt, they generally cut the salt with nickel blades. And that nickel, those metals, can end up in the salt, and then when you eat that, it ends up in your body, and then you have to come to a doctor like me to detox you of that nickel because you were eating it. This is done with special, very expensive blades, and that way the metals don't end up inside of you, and you still get all those minerals. If you are on a low carbohydrate diet, which I recommend you are on one, I really highly recommend that, you also have a higher need for sodium and other minerals. because it is that low carbohydrate diets are somewhat diuretic, where it makes you urinate more, and as that happens, you're going to lose more nutrients and more minerals. So if you're going to lose them, you have to add them back in. And I have news for you: the foods that you're eating that are being from over-farmed farms are not having all 72 trace minerals put back in. They put in NPK. That's the fertilizer. Nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. That's all they add back in, and they neglect all those other ones, because those three minerals are the things that enable a tomato to look like a tomato and make a cucumber look like a cucumber. So why would they add back in all these other expensive things if it's not going to make the appearance or taste change at all? So you definitely have to eat some of that sodium and get good stuff. If you have questions about this, or you want to order this, you can get it from us. You probably could find it online somewhere too. But you can order it from us as well. Just mention that you saw this Facebook Live and we can get it for you. And then sometime in the future, we'll probably have a store on our website that you can buy some of these things from. So, so that's my take on sodium. There's a sweet spot, and it's a pretty big sweet spot. And the average amount of sodium that people in the U.S. are eating right now, again, is 3.4 grams, which is actually in between the 3,000 and 6,000 milligrams that I recommended in the first place. So get a good quality salt. Don't be afraid of eating some salt, but don't go too low on it. If you go too low on it, it's not going to be good for you. I was just at my parents' house on Thursday, and I saw that they had low sodium salt that had other chemicals in it. And, you know, my dad is still doing those things. So I promised I'm going to send them some pink salt, and they can have that. And that way you can have more energy and be healthier and live a happier life. So if you have questions about this, you can email us. You can enter it in the bottom of the comments. If you find this valuable, then share it with other people. If you want to live longer life, eat better food and give up the bad stuff and eat some of that pink salt as well. So I see a question right now. Someone asked me what kind of salt. This is it right here. All right. So I thank you for tuning in again. I thank you for watching. I hope this helps you. I hope it makes your life healthier, and I hope that you share it with another person. Thanks again for watching, and I will talk with you next week, somewhere between 12:30 and 1 o'clock, ideally at 12:30. So thanks again for watching. Bye-bye.